She said one word, out. 3 days later, a helicopter landed, and the billionaire's father asked her to change the world. There are some words you can whisper to the wind and they vanish, harmless as smoke. And then there are words like stones dropped into a pond. They ripple, they echo, they come back to find you. Maya Flores's stone was a single syllable, one she spat with more conviction than caution. Out. It should have been the end of an unpleasant table at the Gilded Spoon. Instead, it was the beginning of something larger, hungrier, and infinitely more dangerous. The Gilded Spoon looked like old money's idea of cozy, which meant velvet banquettes rubbed bald by decades of sharp suits, brass fixtures polished to the color of tarnished teeth, and a lingering fog of cigars smoked long before the city outlawed such things. It wasn't glamorous, it was a relic. But for Maya, it was holy ground. The place smelled of charred steak and desperation, which was fitting because both were her daily bread. Every plate she cleared and every glass she refilled was another fragile brick in the wall keeping her sister's illness at bay. She moved through the dining room like someone threading a needle in the dark, swift, precise, and unwilling to miss a stitch. Her shoes, bought secondhand, squeaked just enough to remind her feet that they were tired. The ache in her calves was the kind that didn't go away with a hot bath. It was permanent, the dull hum of a body worked to its limit. But she smiled anyway. That smile was her armor. Guests thought it meant she was happy to serve. In reality, it meant she had calculated the pharmacy bill and knew exactly how many tips she needed before midnight. Her younger sister Amelia haunted every corner of Maya's thoughts. The girl's laugh, bright but fragile as a bird in winter, was the real reason Maya carried trays heavier than her own dreams. Amelia's disease had a name that sounded like a foreign curse, juvenile dermatobiositis. But to Maya it was simpler. The thing trying to steal her sister's future. Each treatment was a miracle with a price tag. Insurance, that cruel gambler, covered some, denied others, and shrugged at the rest. Maya's job at the Spoon wasn't a choice. It was the only battlefield where she could fight with tips and overtime. That Tuesday night should have been easy. Half-empty dining room, a low murmur of conversation, the clatter of silverware against porcelain. She was clearing a table when her eyes landed on the storm brewing at table 7. Tristan Sterling. Even if you didn't know the name, you knew the type. Money draped on him like perfume, sharp and suffocating. He had the posture of a man who'd never carried anything heavier than a credit card, the grin of someone who mistook cruelty for charm. He was flanked by 3 friends, each one an echo of the same entitled silhouette. They had been trouble since they sat down, snapping fingers for service, sending cocktails back because the ice cubes were wrong. Normally, Maya handled them. She had a way of turning her smile into steel, of reminding loud men that their tantrums were boring. But tonight her section had filled fast, and poor Chloe, 19 years old, nerves like spun glass, had been tossed to the wolves for dessert service. Maya watched Chloe approach the table, her notepad trembling like a leaf in a storm. Tristan leaned back in his chair, lazy smirk spreading, and said loudly enough for half the room to hear, "Well, well, they sent us a fresh one." His friends chuckled, a sound that made Maya's stomach knot. Chloe murmured her name, barely audible, and Tristan repeated it like he was trying out a new toy. "Chloe," he drawled, eyes glittering. "A little Bambi in the big bad forest." The boys laughed harder, the sound bouncing against the Spoon's gilded walls. Maya froze mid-step, water pitcher sweating in her hand. This wasn't new. She'd seen the same play performed by men in suits and boys with trust funds. But it never failed to ignite something deep in her chest, a rage mixed with the memory of Amelia's frailty. People who fought real battles didn't need to invent games like this. Chloe, poor girl, tried to redirect. "What can I get you for dessert?" she asked, voice shaking. But Tristan wasn't done. He plucked the notepad from her hand, his smirk twisting. "We don't want dessert. We want a show. Tell us a joke." Chloe turned red, stammered that she didn't know any. Tristan leaned in, voice low and sharp. "You're the help. You do what we say. Be charming or be nothing." Then he brushed a strand of hair from her cheek with fingers that dripped ownership. That was it. The coil inside Maya snapped, silent and absolute. She set the pitcher down with a thud that carried farther than it should have. Heads turned. The gilded spoon became a stage. She walked, not hurried, not flustered, measured. Her steps were the steady tick of a clock about to strike. She placed herself beside Chloe, shoulders squared, gaze locked on Tristan. The room hushed as though it, too, held its breath. "Give her back the notepad," Maya said. Her voice wasn't raised, but it had the weight of stone. Tristan blinked, slow and reptilian. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. You're making my colleague and every other guest here uncomfortable. Give it back, place your order, or leave." A laugh snorted from one of his friends. "Do you have any idea who he is?" Maya didn't glance at him. "I know he's a customer," she said evenly. "And customers treat staff with respect. He's failing at that." Tristan's smirk hardened. He pushed the notepad across the table like it was contaminated. "You've got nerve. I could have you fired before dessert. I could buy this dump and pave it over just to watch you beg for parking space." "Maybe," Maya said, calm as winter air. "But right now, you're just a man harassing a young woman trying to work. So, for the last time, either order with decency or get out." The silence was heavy as lead. Chloe's breath hitched beside her. Mr. Henderson, their jittery manager, hovered near the host stand, sweat beading on his forehead. Tristan rose, using his height like a weapon. He sneered down at Maya. "You're a waitress. You fetch things. You don't handle me. I want you fired." Now Henderson scurried closer, his voice squeaky with panic. "Mr. Sterling, please." But Maya didn't yield. She turned her head slightly, just enough to catch her manager's eye. "If this is the kind of customer you want here, then I don't want to work here anyway." Then back to Tristan. "Out!" The word dropped like a gavel. Tristan's face twisted, fury blotching his perfect cheekbones. He cursed, loud enough to rattle glasses, kicked his chair back, and spat, "You'll regret this. I'll ruin you." Then he stormed out, his entourage stumbling after. The gilded spoon exhaled, the silence broken only by the chair rocking on its side. Maya stood there, heart hammering, but her face was carved from stone. She'd won the moment. But even as Chloe looked at her with wide, grateful eyes, Maya knew the real battle had only just begun. Mr. Henderson's office had the dimensions of a broom closet and the humidity of a greenhouse. He paced behind his metal desk like a wind-up toy, the chain on his wristwatch flashing under the fluorescent light. Maya stood with her hands clasped in front of her apron, tasting copper where she'd bitten the inside of her cheek. The room smelled of printer toner and old coffee, a stale little purgatory where decisions came down wrapped in fear. He scolded without breathing, words spraying like grease off a hot griddle. She watched his mouth move and heard only the essentials, reckless Selfish. Do you understand who that was? What she understood was this. His terror wasn't about standards. It was about rent, liquor licenses, suppliers, the invisible web Tristan's last name could tug. It stung that he called her selfish, while her sister's prescriptions sat like landmines on Maya's kitchen table. But she held her tongue. She had chosen the word out with both eyes open. Now she stood for it. Suspended, unpaid. Go home, don't call, we'll call. The verdict landed with bureaucratic neatness. She nodded once, dignity tucked around her like a thin coat in winter, and stepped back into the main room's dim gold. The dining room hummed again, restored to a facsimile of peace. Chloe caught Maya's sleeve near the server station and whispered a rasped, "Thank you." Maya squeezed her hand, quick, human, nothing heroic, and left before her throat could betray her. The bus ride home rattled her bones. Neon dragged across the windows in smeared colors, the city's afterthoughts painted in rain and brake lights. She hugged her tote to her chest, the way you hold a sleeping child on a bumpy road. At her stop, the wind smelled of wet concrete and the bakery's caramelized sugar from the corner. Her building, a brick shoebox with arthritic radiators, met her with the dull clack of a failing elevator. She climbed the stairs anyway, because moving kept panic from settling in. Her apartment greeted her with its familiar hush, the patient tick of the kitchen clock, the polite cough of the fridge, the stack of bills on the table leaning like a cliff over a narrow ledge. She set her keys in the bowl, poured tap water that tasted faintly of pennies, and sat. The silence expanded until it pressed against her skin. She checked her phone for messages she knew weren't there, and set it face down, like you do with a card you refuse to play. Sleep arrived in broken pieces, the kind you have to assemble yourself. She woke at 3 with her heart running ahead of her and pictured Amelia's face, the moon-pale skin after infusions, the brave half-smile that never quite sealed, the soft, sore kind of courage that never made the news. It steadied her and shamed her in equal measure. She had taken a stand for a stranger and might have endangered the one person she loved most. That thought was a blade dulled only by exhaustion. Day 1 of suspension was a slow leak. She tried scrubbing the already clean stove. She alphabetized the spice rack like a clerk cataloging regrets. When the quiet grew teeth, she called her mother 2 states away and aimed for cheerful. Amelia's week was rough, the fatigue heavy, a doctor hinting at a new infusion with a price that made the air thinner. "We'll manage," Maya lied, and hung up with the swallow of someone who just drank the sea. By day 2, the silence became a conspiracy. She practiced an apology in her head, sanded the edges until it could pass for obedience. She imagined walking back into the spoon and wearing the mask of contrition that got mouthy girls a second chance. Then she pictured Tristan's hand brushing Chloe's hair, the way ownership had oiled his voice, and the apology curdled in her throat. Pride had no place in a life like hers, but some lines once crossed are not lines, but traps. On day 3, she put on her black slacks and white blouse like a widow dressing for court. She told herself she was simply going to fetch her last paycheck, or at least ask when the trial would be held. The bus hissed her onto downtown's curb, where the Gilded Spoon's gold leaf sign winked at her like an old joke. Taped to the front glass was the punchline, a printed page of reviews, 1-star shrapnel, the kind that bleeds a place out in a week. She pressed close to read, the glass chill on her forehead, breath fogging the lies. A city boy 88 describing a psychotic tirade, fine dine queen, lamenting a hostile brunette, a Sterling fan's son, condemning the restaurant for attacking patrons. Different voices, one hand behind them. Her name was threaded through like a wick. It wasn't rage she felt first, it was nausea. The body's simple wisdom that knows when something poisonous has been slipped into the well. Behind the glass, she could see Henderson marshaling the lunch prep like a man organizing deck chairs on something doomed. She reached for the handle, then didn't. What would she say? That the smear was deliberate? He knew that. That the internet could salt the earth? He'd already tasted it. She turned away, ready to retreat to her small, exhausted life, when a sedan slid to the curb like punctuation. The window lowered to reveal a woman with a black bob sharp enough to cut paper and eyes that measured without malice. "Are you Maya Flores?" Her voice was the careful temperature of boardrooms, neither warm nor cold, calibrated. "Yes," Maya managed, surprised to hear herself sound like somebody with a right to be there. "My employer would like to speak with you. He's on his way." "Your employer?" The question felt inadequate in the face of the car's quiet money and the woman's composed presence. The answer arrived on the air, the distant helicopter thump that turns heads before the mind supplies a theory. People at the crosswalk shaded their eyes. Pigeons took the hint and relocated. The sound came lower, closer, until the plaza across from the Spoon trembled with rotor wash. The woman, Miss Davies, Maya would later learn, tilted her chin toward the sky with a hint of amusement, as if to say, "Yes, that one." Inside the Spoon, the staff clustered by the windows like townsfolk watching a weather event. Henderson's face had the purple-white bloom of panic, and his tie had given up, hanging like a tired tongue. He spotted Maya as if she'd conjured the noise and grabbed her elbow with fingers that trembled. "What did you do?" he whispered, panic thinning his voice. "Is that him? Tell me that's not him." Maya didn't bother to answer, partly because she couldn't, and partly because, for the first time in days, the responsibility wasn't hers to carry. The room stilled. The door opened. He entered without hurry, and the light seemed to step aside to let him through. Silver hair, not the fussy salon kind, but the honest kind that announces time without apology. Suit the color of afternoon storm clouds. A face that had learned not to flinch. He did not look around the room to gather attention. He brought it with him like gravity. People say power is loud. Often it is the quiet that proves it. "Mr. Sterling," Henderson bleated, his hand already out, damp with sorry. The man didn't take it. His gaze had found Maya the way a compass finds north. He inclined his head toward table 7. The scene of the crime recreated in plush, velvet, and brass. "Miss Flores," he said, voice low and resonant, "would you join me?" She walked as if the floor were new ice. The booth swallowed her in worn velvet and the smell of 1,000 dinners. He sat opposite, untying the room's knot merely by folding his hands. For a long breath, he said nothing. And in that silence, Maya heard the restaurant's odd orchestra. The ice machine's cough, a distant plate settling, someone in the kitchen breathing through the panic. He spoke of the Spoon as if it had a memory, his second date with the woman who would become his wife, an expensive bottle of wine she disliked, and married him anyway. It wasn't small talk, it was a deliberate lowering of the blade. Then he asked for her account, not with a threat, but with the expectation that truth could stand on its own legs. She told him, stone by stone. She didn't embellish or make herself heroic. She described the drink returns, The finger snaps, the Bambi, the notepad theft, the touch that had not been violent, but had been violence nonetheless. She used Tristan's words the way you use a mirror, to show rather than argue. Finally, she told him about the choice she had offered and the one she had made. Only once did her voice falter on the word touched, and she steadied it by picturing Amelia's hand in hers. He listened the way mountains listen, still, patient, certain they'll outlast the weather. When she finished, the silence returned, more companion than void. He lifted his water, studied a bead of condensation tracking down the glass, and set it back with a click that sounded, in that room, like a verdict. "The report I received corroborates what you've said," he murmured. "The report?" The word felt strange in her mouth, bureaucratic, a folder stamped with other people's decisions. He did not flinch from what came next. He explained surveillance like a penance. His son tracked for a year, not to protect the boy, but to protect the world from the boy. Audio from the night collated, and on his desk before Tristan got home to start his petty war. There was no triumph in his voice, only weariness. A father's private failure aired without malice. He called Tristan a black hole of want, a child he had armored with money and accidentally starved of a spine. He spoke as if indicting himself. In that confession lived something Maya hadn't expected to feel for a man like him. Respect edged with pity, the human kind, not the condescending kind. He turned the same gaze on her and named what she had done. Not insubordination, not customer service gone wrong, but character. In a world trained to grovel, she had refused. He valued refusal, it seemed, when it was aimed at the right altar. A proposal followed, not sweetened with flattery, but served like a contract to a person considered worthy of one. He had a foundation, his armor, his penance, the work he called important without sounding like a commercial. He needed a spine for a particular program, someone who saw faces, not spreadsheets, who knew the geometry of crisis from inside it. He said the title and the salary and the budget with the same steadiness he had used on the word black hole, as if all of it were simple nouns. Maya felt the air thin, then thicken, and then he spoke. Amelia's. Name as if he'd been in Maya's kitchen when the pharmacy called. He named the disease correctly. He named the doctor. He named the insurance denial dated last Tuesday and the debt aged 90 days. Privacy violation? Absolutely. Mercy? Also absolutely. She wanted to be furious at the breach, but fury got swallowed by the relief of being known so precisely that help could find the right door. He slid a portfolio across, photos of hospitals and wetlands, and kids with hair regrowing into hope. Beneath it, a single crisp page with her sister's name at the top and numbers that made breath an optional luxury. A grant pending a director's signature. The director's name was blank. The space seemed to glow like a warm coal. "What's the catch?" she asked, because superstition demands you piss off the fates before you accept their gift. "You do the work," he said gently. "You build, you fight, you do not look away." 30 days, provisional. If you hate our guts at the end, you walk away. Your sister's grant stands. Some promises feel like silk and some like rope. This one felt like a harness, meant for weight, made for motion. She thought of Amelia's tired jokes. She thought of Chloe's shaking hands. She thought of Henderson's fear and Tristan's grin and all the invisible women who hesitate to say out because rent is due. She thought she could live with a harness if she got to choose where to pull. He stood. "I prefer to talk solutions from higher ground," he said, the corner of his mouth softening into almost smile. "My helicopter's waiting." Miss Davies reappeared the way competence does, exactly when called, never with fanfare. The door opened to an afternoon bright as a revelation. The sedan glided them across the plaza, transformed into a pocket airport, security men at angles that suggested a geometry of respect. The helicopter sat like a black dragonfly, rotor blades patient. Wind found her hair and tossed it. Grits stung her calves. The smell of hot metal and jet fuel braided with the city's spice of exhaust and street food. She didn't know there was a kind of air that wakes the back of the brain and tells it to pay attention. Inside, the cabin was hush and leather, and the faint ozone of machinery ready to lift humans into an argument with gravity. The harness buckled with the satisfying certainty of something designed by an engineer who worried on behalf of strangers. Through the tinted bubble of the window, the spoon looked suddenly small, like a music box you close when the song grows sad. "First time?" he asked, the warmth of amusement humanizing the architecture of his face. She nodded, and the floor fell away. Buildings slid beneath them like shuffled cards. Streets flattened into lines, ruled with a child's patience. The river caught sunlight and tossed it back in bright handfuls. Fear prickled her scalp and then receded, replaced by that thin, fine feeling you get when a new part of the map reveals itself. Down there was the bus stop where she counted tips by lamplight. There was the library where she had learned which forms to fill. There, beyond a patchwork of brick and park, the hospital where Amelia's veins learned the names of medicines. "What do you see?" he asked, a test without malice. "People," she said, surprising herself, all crammed into little squares, trying not to drown. And a few rooftops where it looks like they learned how to breathe. He considered that, and the tilt of his head told her she'd passed. The helicopter banked, and a monolith of glass rose like a black mountain to meet them. The landing was a sigh more than a bump. When the door opened, the air was cleaner, the wind stainless. They stepped onto a roof that refused to be a roof. Maple leaves, red as confession, lavender in soft purple flares, a glass pavilion catching sky. Inside, the pavilion muted the city, as if they'd walked into the center of a bell between rings. The view pinned the world to the horizon with 4 bright needles. He spoke of his father's hands cracked by millwork and a vow he'd made about never being powerless again. He admitted the irony of building armor that had raised a son who preferred to dent rather than shield. Then he placed the only weapon that made sense between them, a job that was not charity, but justice with a ledger. He pushed the page toward her again, and this time the signature line didn't glow. It waited. She pictured her sister's name on a calendar with fewer question marks. She pictured the faces in waiting rooms, the way strangers tried not to listen to each other cry. She pictured walking back into the Gilded Spoon to beg for scraps, and the way the word out would turn to dust in her mouth if she did. When she said yes, it sounded small, but some doors swing on quiet hinges. He nodded as if confirming something he'd suspected all along. Miss Davies appeared with a tablet and an efficiency that felt like mercy. Paperwork could be a form of love if it ended in relief. Down below, the city kept shouldering its ordinary burdens. Up here, she signed the first of her new life. A line for Amelia, a line for herself, and a line, invisible but binding, that tethered her stubborn waitress heart to a machine built to move mountains. Later, as the helicopter lowered them back through the wash of sunlight and grit, The gilded spoon came into focus once more. Same gold sign, same velvet, same history, except now it looked like a chapter, not a sentence. When the skids kissed the plaza, she felt both lighter and obligated, which turned out to be a tolerable combination. At the curb, Miss Davies opened the town car door. Henderson stared from the window with the expression of a man who'd seen a pawn reach the far side and come back as a queen. Maya offered him nothing. No triumph, no gloat, only the courtesy of a steady look. The door whispered shut. The car pulled into traffic smooth as a decision. Behind her, the restaurant exhaled. Ahead, a tower waited with higher air. Between them, the city's grid stitched itself under the tires, a quilt of old wounds and new promises. The Sterling Tower lobby could have doubled as a cathedral if the gods it worshipped were marble and money. Light spilled from chandeliers the size of small cars, each crystal drop catching the morning sun and scattering it across polished stone floors like a deliberate miracle. The hush inside wasn't silence, but engineered acoustics, the kind that made footsteps seem respectful, that made conversation lower themselves to whispers. Maya stood just past the revolving doors, feeling as though she trespassed into a future that wasn't hers. Her black slacks, pressed as best as her iron could manage, suddenly looked like thrift store fabric against the sea of sleek suits and high heels tapping across marble. Her blouse felt too thin, her shoes too ordinary, her heart too loud. Miss Davies was beside her, crisp and calm as ever. Not a hair was out of place in that sharp black bob. If she noticed Maya's hesitation, she gave no sign. She moved with the surety of someone for whom the tower was as natural as oxygen. "This way," she said, and Maya obeyed, her steps echoing far louder than she intended. They approached a security desk manned by guards whose suits were cut to conceal muscle and earpieces. One looked up, recognized Davies with a quick nod, and pressed a button. The turnstile clicked open. Maya expected questions, an ID, maybe a pat-down. Instead, she was ushered forward without so much as a glance. Her presence here, she realized, had already been decided by someone far higher than the men at the desk. The elevator awaited them, a private capsule of brushed steel and glass that reflected the tower's gleam back onto itself. When the doors sealed, the ascent began in silence. Maya's ears popped. She felt the city peel away beneath her as if gravity itself had decided she no longer belonged to it. Davies spoke only once during the climb. "You'll meet Mr. Sterling in his private office. He prefers conversations without intermediaries." Maya nodded, throat dry. Words felt useless. The truth was, she had no script for this moment. 3 days ago, she had been bussing tables and calculating how many tips it would take to cover half a pharmacy bill. Now she was being lifted toward the sky in an elevator reserved for men and women who shaped economies. The doors opened onto a room that was more landscape than office. One wall was nothing but glass, framing the lake's steel-gray expanse and the city's restless arteries. The rest was minimalist, dark wood, a desk that looked carved from a single massive tree, leather chairs that whispered when you touched them. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something subtler, maybe expensive ink. And there he was. Robert Sterling stood with his back to them, hands clasped loosely behind him, gazing out at the horizon as though waiting for it to answer a question. He turned slowly when they entered, and for a brief moment, Maya understood why the financial world spoke his name with reverence and fear. The man carried silence the way others carried weapons. "Miss Flores," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "Thank you for coming." Her instinct was to say she hadn't exactly had a choice. Instead, she nodded, remembering her manners, though her pulse thudded in her ears. Davies gave a slight bow of her head. "I'll leave you to it, sir." She departed, her heels ticking a rhythm on the polished stone until the elevator swallowed her whole. Maya and Robert Sterling were alone. He gestured toward a pair of chairs near the window. "Please sit." She obeyed, perching on the edge as though afraid she might stain the leather. He lowered himself opposite her, unhurried, as if the world would wait for him. "I imagine you have questions," he began. "Yes, sir," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her tone, "though I'm not sure where to start." "Start anywhere. Truth has no wrong entry point." His gaze was piercing, but not cruel. It reminded her of doctors who'd looked at Amelia, not at her face, but at her test results. Analytical, searching, already planning 10 steps ahead. "Why me?" she asked. The words escaped before she could weigh them. "I'm just a waitress. I don't belong here." The corner of his mouth ticked, not quite a smile. "You told my son to leave when no one else would. That alone makes you belong more than half the people who work in this building." Heat flushed her cheeks. She glanced down at her hands, clenched tightly in her lap. "I didn't think. I just reacted." "That," Sterling said, leaning forward slightly, "is precisely the point. Reaction reveals character. My son thrives because people think too long, calculate the risk of offending him, weigh their rent against their conscience. You didn't. You stood." He let the silence breathe, then added, "I need people who stand." Maya's throat tightened. "For what?" "For this." He reached for a leather-bound portfolio on the desk, slid it toward her. She hesitated, then opened it. Photographs stared back. Hospitals, schools, wetlands, smiling children. Pages thick with numbers, millions, billions, stacked like abstract hope. "The Sterling Foundation," he explained. $9 billion in assets, created for one purpose: to wield power where it is absent, to build, not destroy. But money is useless without the right hands guiding it. I've interviewed dozens of polished candidates. Not one has shown me what you showed at that table. Maya turned the pages slowly, each image a small rebellion against the world she knew. A mother hugging a child in a ward, a student tossing a graduation cap, a village well spilling water. They were miracles stapled into a binder. She wanted to believe them, but skepticism clawed at her ribs. "Why tell me this?" she asked finally, her voice thin. "Because I want you to run part of it," Sterling said simply. The words dropped like stones in a still pond. For a moment, Maya couldn't breathe. She almost laughed, the absurdity too sharp to swallow. "Run it? I'm not qualified. I have no degree, no experience." "You have experience," he interrupted, his tone gentle but immovable. "The kind no university can provide. You know what it is to fight uphill, to balance bills against breath, to protect someone weaker than you. That is the experience I require." Her chest ached. Amelia's face surfaced in her mind, the soft courage, the quiet suffering. She swallowed hard. "And you know about her," she whispered. "I do." The admission was clean, unapologetic. He didn't flinch. "I know what you carry, and I know you cannot carry it much longer alone." Her eyes blurred. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall in front of him. "So this is charity?" "No," he said, the words sharp. "This is purpose. Charity is coins dropped in a cup. Purpose is a sword placed in steady hands. I am offering you the latter. For the first time since he'd walked into the gilded spoon, Maya believed him. Not fully, not without suspicion, but enough to wonder what it would mean to say yes. She closed the portfolio with trembling fingers. The weight of it remained on her lap, heavier than any tray she'd ever carried. "What happens if I fail?" she asked quietly. "Then you will have failed with integrity," Robert Sterling replied. "And that is more than most men in my world can claim after a lifetime of success." Maya stared out at the city spread beneath the glass wall. From this height, the streets looked like veins, the cars like red and white blood cells coursing through a restless body. She had always felt trapped inside it, a tiny cell herself. Now from up here, she saw the whole organism. And for the first time, she wondered if she could heal more than just her sister. The city lay beneath her like a puzzle, pieces of wealth and poverty pressed together, their seams visible from Sterling's window. Maya's hands remained on the closed portfolio, her palms damp, her chest a storm of disbelief. Robert Sterling did not rush her. He sat with the patience of a man who had built empires by waiting out storms. His silence was not empty. It was space, a kind of test. Would she fill it with excuses, collapse into gratitude, or hold it with dignity? At last she said, "You don't know me?" "Not really. You know a file. You know my sister's medical records. You know I yelled at your son. That's not enough to hand me something like this." Sterling leaned back, folding his long hands together. "I know more than that, Miss Flores. I know your mother works night sewing in a garment warehouse. I know your father left when you were 10. I know you've never missed a payment until the day Amelia's treatments began. And I know that when the bills climbed higher than you could see, you didn't run, you carried them." The words landed like blows. Maya's shoulders tensed, anger and humiliation burning hot. "That's not knowledge," she snapped. "That's surveillance." "Yes," he said simply, "and it told me what I needed to know. Your spine is made of iron, though the world has tried to melt it down. My son would never survive a month in your shoes. You did not just survive, you fought. That's what matters." She wanted to argue, to say she had stumbled more than she had fought, that she had cried into her pillow every night Amelia's fever spiked. But the truth of his words pressed against her defenses. She had fought, and she was still fighting. Robert opened the portfolio again, sliding a single sheet across the polished desk. It was a grant application with familiar handwriting. Her own, copied from the charity form she'd filled out months ago and sent into the void. She remembered sealing the envelope at 3 a.m., telling herself it was pointless, but mailing it anyway. At the top, under recipient, was her sister's name, Amelia Flores. Diagnosis: juvenile dermatomyositis. Status: pending director's signature. Her vision blurred, the letters bleeding together. "This," she began, her voice cracking. "This is your first case," Robert said. "Yours to approve or decline. The funds are waiting." Maya gripped the paper. "You're telling me I could sign this and, just like that, her treatments are covered? All of them?" "Yes." It was too much. The air in the room thickened, pressing against her ribs. She set the paper down, her hand shaking. "Why me?" she whispered again, not as a challenge but as a plea. Robert's eyes softened. "Because you see people, Miss Flores. Not numbers, not problems, not pawns. You saw my son's cruelty, and instead of swallowing it to save yourself, you shielded a girl who couldn't. That instinct cannot be taught, and it cannot be faked. Her chest ached with the weight of it, the offer, the truth, the risk. She thought of Amelia, pale in her hospital bed, whispering, "Don't worry, Maya. I'm fine." She thought of Chloe, wide-eyed and trembling, while a spoiled heir treated her like property. She thought of the hundreds of faceless families who must have filled out forms like this one, praying someone would read them. "I don't know how to run a foundation," Maya said finally. "You will learn," Robert replied. "I am not hiring a resume, I am hiring a soul. And souls don't come with training manuals." The elevator dinged faintly in the distance, someone arriving on the executive floor. But Robert did not turn. His gaze stayed fixed on her, steady as stone. "You don't have to decide today," he added, "but know this. The world has already decided what you are. Disposable. Replaceable. My son counted on that. I am giving you the chance to decide for yourself." Instead, Maya closed her eyes. For a heartbeat, the room faded. The marble, the lake, the man across from her. She saw only Amelia's face. The choice was no choice at all. When she opened her eyes, tears blurred the skyline, but her voice was clear. "Then I accept." Robert Sterling inclined his head, the faintest ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Good," he said. "Then let us begin." The elevator doors parted on a sigh of cold air and quiet money. Maya stepped into a corridor that looked like it had been cut from obsidian and polished with patience. Miss Davies walked half a step ahead, her heels ticking a metronome on the stone. People glanced up as they passed, limitless coffee, calibrated smiles, the faint scent of citrus cleaner, and ambition. "This floor is foundation operations," Davies said without looking over. "Legal to the right. Program to the left. Finance dead ahead, which is why we rarely go dead ahead." In a glass-walled bullpen, analysts hovered over multiple screens, like weather forecasters reading the barometer of human suffering. Names scrolled past, diagnoses, funding gaps, redacted ages, cities that never make the news. Maya felt the instinctive flinch, and then the equally instinctive lean in. The view from altitude had been breathtaking. This was the ground war. Davies swiped them through into a smaller room with a long table and a wall of light. The entire surface, a live dashboard. "Orientation," she said. "Short and surgical." A compact man with sleeves rolled, tie off, and eyes like sharpened slate stood when they entered. "Marcus Heller, General Counsel," he said, offering a hand. "Welcome to the Thresher." "The what?" "The Thresher," he repeated mildly. "Where raw need goes in and compliant help comes out. Minus the parts the state and insurers don't like. We try not to lose too much grain." He spoke in legal metaphors. It should have been annoying. Somehow it wasn't. Davies motioned to the wall, where a grid of cases glowed. "This is our current queue. 489 active petitions, triaged by urgency, need, and solvability. Your unit, Patient Advocacy Grants, manages the cases where solvability hinges on money and leverage, not miracles. We are very good at money. We are decent at leverage. And miracles?" Maya asked. Davies's face didn't change. "We don't trade in them. But sometimes they show up, and we write them down as if we planned it." Heller tapped a tablet. "You'll have a team of 6, 2 nurse navigators, 1 social worker, 1 data analyst, 1 benefits specialist. We stole from an insurer and a community liaison who knows every church basement in a 100-mile radius. You approve grants, yes, but your leverage is in escalation paths. We move faster than bureaucracy, and we hit harder. It is also," Davies added, "a provisional appointment. 30 days. You can accept that as a leash or as a runway. Your choice. Maya stared at the luminous wall. A little boy in Tucson needed an air ambulance. A retired teacher in Baltimore had been denied a chemo regimen because she once forgot to sign a form. A single dad in Omaha couldn't afford to miss his next infusion. His work schedule and the clinic's hours were a Venn diagram that didn't overlap. All those lives held in suspension by calendar friction and billing. Codes. What is my first hour? She asked. Davies nodded once, as if a small note had been satisfied. Your first hour is a call. They moved to a quiet office where the furniture was simpler and the view felt less like a crown and more like a responsibility. A speakerphone sat in the middle of a round table, red light pulsing. Dr. Evans, Davies said, and tapped the button. Miss Flores. The voice that came through was a map of fatigue. It's Paul Evans. Got an email from the foundation about your sister Maya braced. Yes. I've been trying to get that therapy approved for 6 months, he said. The foundation's counsel sent me a template for a medical necessity affidavit I've never seen before. It cites case law I didn't know existed. Where did they find this? Heller leaned toward the speaker. We wrote it yesterday. Silence, then a ragged laugh. Well, it worked. The insurer reversed the denial. He exhaled, sound-catching, a choked little miracle in real time. I wanted to tell you before the portal updates. The infusion is scheduled for Friday. Maya closed her eyes. There it was, the floor under her feet, solid for the first time in a year. Her hand trembled on the edge of the table. She let it tremble. Davies stood very still, the way you stand when an earthquake passes. After the call, Maya took a long breath and another, as if air had to relearn its path. Thank you, she said, to no one in particular and to everyone. Okay. What's second hour? Second hour is less pleasant, Heller said. He tapped his tablet. The screen on the wall shifted to a headline, then 10 more, multiplying like a bad rumor in a sterile petri dish. Billionaire rewards, unhinged, waitress with 6-figure job. Sterling Foundation director lacks experience. Who is Maya Flores? Hero or hustler? There was grainy cell phone footage, a slice of her confrontation with Tristan, cropped so tightly you couldn't see his hands or Chloe's face. The smear began 72 hours ago, Heller said. Coordinated bots, a handful of eager bloggers who cash checks without reading footnotes. We've blocked the worst threats. It will get worse before it gets better. Tristan, Maya asked, throat dry. Heller lifted a shoulder. There's no signature, but the font looks familiar. Davies' jaw flexed. We ignore theater and prepare for court. I've scheduled you to meet the board's risk committee at 5 beat. They are not Tristan. What are they? Sharp, Davies said, and loyal to the foundation. Maya spent the next hours with the team she hadn't known she'd needed her whole life. Anna, the nurse navigator with the steady voice you'd follow through a storm. Curtis, the social worker who remembered names the way some people remember faces. Priya, the analyst whose desk was a beautiful chaos of sticky notes and code. Jamal, the benefits specialist with a laugh that made bureaucrats lose their place in scripts. Gloria, the liaison who'd grown up translating for her mother, and now did it for a city. They moved like a practiced kitchen. There was language, shorthand, a choreography that made sense fast. The first case was a man in Laredo whose transplant had been approved, but whose housing for the mandatory 30-day post-op stay had not. The second case was a girl in Boise whose life depended on a drug moved out of reach by a glitch in a pharmacy benefit manager's contract that everyone was pretending not to see. They hit phones, emails, escalations. They swapped scripts for dealing with the bland tyranny of hold music. Maya took notes, then stopped taking notes and started speaking. She heard the steadiness in her voice and felt something unlock. Old muscle memory from a life she'd once thought she'd lost. Triage. Prioritization. Calm. At 4:30, Davies appeared in the doorway, the way a precise clock appears. "Board time," she said. The risk committee sat in a room lined with photographs of past grants. A line of nurses holding new incubators, a playground ribbon cut by a mayor with a crooked smile, a farmer pointing to green shoots in a field that had been dust for 2 years. 3 board members sat at a small oval table, an oncologist with gray hair in a low ponytail, a woman in a navy suit with hands built for handshakes and courtroom doors, and a community organizer with a face that said he had spent his life knocking on doors that didn't want to open. "Miss Flores," the oncologist said, rising halfway as if to meet her in the middle. "I'm Dr. Liang. This is Miss Cade from the Audit Committee and Mr. Ruiz from Community Partnerships. We know why you're here, because a helicopter landed on a plaza," Maya said, before she could stop herself. It got the smallest of smiles. "Partly," Cade said. "Mostly because you now direct a program that spends more money in a week than most nonprofits see in a year. And because the internet is loud." "We've read your file," Ruiz said gently. "We prefer meeting people to reading them." Cade steepled her fingers. "We'll be clear. We are enthusiastic about the choice Mr. Sterling has made. We are also responsible for sidestepping landmines. If we approve your operational authority today, it will be with guardrails. That is not a reflection on you. It is a reflection on gravity." "What do you need to know?" Maya asked. "Why you?" Cade said. "Not in biography." In function, Maya looked at her hands on the table. Short nails, a faint line of dish soap dryness around the cuticles, and then met their eyes. "Because I make rooms quieter," she said. "Not by being the loudest voice, but by naming the thing everyone is afraid to say. Because I know the difference between a crisis and a tantrum. Because when someone tells me no, I ask which clause. And because I will never spend $1 to be seen spending $1, Liang's mouth twitched, the doctor's version of a nod. Ruiz leaned in. "What happens when Mr. Sterling's son calls a journalist and asks them to ask you about the case you approved for Amelia Flores?" "I say yes," Maya replied. "I say my first act as director was a conflict, and the board knew it and signed off on a transparent process. I will not pretend my life doesn't exist to make other people comfortable." Cade's eyes warmed a fraction. "And when someone you love becomes a lever, then I hold the fulcrum." They asked about metrics, she would publish them. About denials, she would learn from them. About hiring, she would hire local first. About the month-long provisional term, she would earn the next 30 days with the first 7. When they finished, Cade set down her pen. "Authority granted," she said, "with the understanding that Miss Davies retains co-signing power on operational expenses above $1 million. We will revisit in 2 weeks." A weight she hadn't named slid off Maya's shoulders. "Thank you," she said. As she stood, her phone hummed. An unknown number with a city code she recognized because grief teaches geography. She stepped into the hall. Maya Flores. "Miss Flores." The voice was oil on ice, smooth, cold, meant to shine and to chill. "You don't know me." "My name is Conrad Vale. I'm chief counsel at Altera Healthy Insurer. She felt her gut tighten. What can I do for you, Mr. Vale? Oh, nothing at all, he said lightly. I wanted to congratulate you on the reversal for your sister. We pride ourselves on being responsive when the law is clear. The law was clear last week, she said. You just hadn't read it yet. A pause. I like you, he said, as if he did. 2 items. 1. I filed a petition for judicial review on the broader affidavit template your counsel circulated. It's creative. We dislike creativity in others. 2. It has come to my attention that a number of your pending grants involve drug access we believe to be outside formulary. If your foundation continues to pay for those drugs, we will classify them as third-party payments interfering with patient cost-sharing obligations and, well, he let the word dangle like a key over a drain. It would be unfortunate if those patients were disqualified from their plans. Maya leaned against the cool wall. You'd punish patients because a charity helped them afford your denials? I'd enforce policy, he said pleasantly. Words matter. So do definitions. We can be friends, Miss Flores, or we can be very busy. She could hear office noise behind him, a printer, a laugh that didn't belong to humor. Is this about my sister? She asked softly. Or is this about all the sisters I'm going to help? It's about precedent, he said. Good afternoon. The line went dead. Davies, was waiting when Maya turned. Insurer? Lawyer, Maya said. He likes definitions. Then we'll redefine his afternoon, Davies said, and the corner of her mouth lifted a millimeter. Come, there's more. They walked past glass rooms where lives were small squares on large screens, past a framed photograph of a child blowing out candles with more candles on the cake than doctors had allowed for. Davies handed her a folder. Media training at 9 tomorrow. Security refresher at 10. Also, there will be an unavoidable event in 3 days you should be briefed on. What event? Robert Sterling's 70th, Davies said. He wasn't going to market. The board insisted. The city will come, so will cameras, and Tristan. The name stuck a little in the air. We can keep him away from you, Davies added. No, Maya said, surprising herself. Let him come. Davies tilted her head. May I ask why? Because if he's a ghost, he haunts everything, she said. If he's a man, he stands in a room and everyone sees him. Davies's eyes held hers a long moment, calculating the weight of things. Very well, she said. Then we prepare for a room. The rest of the evening was a relay. She approved a grant for air filters in a mold-choked apartment where the child's cough had a calendar. She wrote a letter to a judge in Cleveland who didn't know that missing an appointment when you don't own a car is less a moral failure than a bus schedule. She stood with Gloria in a fluorescent clinic waiting room while a mother let a tired toddler sleep across her lap like a question mark. She learned where the vending machine jammed and which security guard told the best bad jokes after midnight. At 11, she stepped out onto the terrace outside her small office. The city buzzed below, sirens far off, the low hum of HVACs, the whisper of a river you only ever hear when it's quiet enough inside your head. She thought of the call from Conrad Vale, of the risk committee's careful eyes, of the way Davies watched a room the way a chess player watches a clock. Her phone vibrated again, a text from an unknown number. You think you're safe because my father likes your story. Another text, a second later. You told me out, you'll hear it back. She stared at the words until the screen dimmed and the city crept into the reflection. Then she took a breath, typed a single sentence, and sent it to Davies. Conrad Vale called to threaten judicial review and third-party payment disqualifications. Also, Tristan just texted, ready to brief and counter. The reply came in under a minute. 9 a.m. War Room. Bring your spine. She smiled, small and unwilling, and let the night air cool her face. She had walked out of a restaurant with nothing but a defiant word and a sister to save. Now she had a floor, a team, a budget with too many zeros, and a list of enemies that preferred the dark. She had always worked nights. She just hadn't always had lights this bright. Inside, the office hummed on, a hive with purpose. Somewhere, a printer chirped. Somewhere, an email landed in a queue that would move faster because she was here. The city exhaled. She did too. And below the terrace, in the street where the river of cars made its slow curve, a black sedan slid to a stop at the curb, waiting long enough to look like patience. A man stepped out into the shadow of the building and glanced up toward the terrace, hand to his ear as if taking instruction from a voice only he could hear. He looked very small from where Maya stood. That was the thing altitude did. It shrank the swagger. She watched his figure until it was absorbed by the city. Then she went back inside to write the briefing for a war that had already started and a birthday party where the guest list included gravity. The first message came just after dawn. Maya the Martyr, Sterling's pet project, the headline blared. It was splashed across the front page of a gossip site Maya had never heard of, but within an hour it was being reposted on Twitter, Instagram, and even the local news crawl. Someone had dug up an old yearbook photo of her, awkward smile, braces still on, and paired it with a paparazzi shot of Tristan leaving a nightclub, sunglasses crooked, smirk intact. The caption beneath read, "Waitress takes down Sterling Air, rewarded with cushy job by his guilt-ridden father." Nepotism or manipulation, you decide. By mid-morning, it was trending. Maya sat at her new desk in the Foundation's downtown office, the pristine glass walls offering no shelter from the digital storm. Her phone buzzed nonstop with texts from numbers she didn't recognize. Some were supportive, most were venom. Davies closed the office door and set her own phone down, face pale. "It's coordinated," she said. "The accounts pushing this are bot-heavy. Sterling PR confirms they've traced some of it back to agencies Tristan has used before." Maya's stomach turned. "He's buying people to smear me?" "Not people." "Machines," Davies corrected, her voice flat. "Algorithms don't get tired. They'll keep repeating the narrative until it sticks." "And what narrative is that?" "That you're an opportunist who embarrassed his son for a payout. That you're not qualified. That you're Robert Sterling's charity case." Maya swallowed hard. It was one thing to feel like an imposter in the privacy of her own thoughts. It was another to see strangers weaponize that fear in neon letters across the internet. Davies slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a thick packet of legal briefs. "Vale is moving quickly," she said. "He's filed for an injunction to block the grant for Amelia, citing conflict of interest and misuse of charitable funds." The words swam on the page. Maya's chest tightened. "But Robert promised." "Promises don't matter in court paperwork does." Vale knows that if he can freeze the grant, he wins twice. He humiliates you, and he wounds Robert in the one place he actually feels. Maya pressed her fists against the desk to keep them from shaking. She was furious, but beneath the fire was fear. The gnawing, bottomless fear that had followed her since Amelia's diagnosis. "What do we do?" she asked. Davis's expression softened, just slightly. "We fight. With everything we have that night, Robert Sterling summoned her to his penthouse. The elevator doors opened onto a room of glass and steel, the skyline of the city glowing like embers beyond. He stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, his reflection a double image in the pane. "They're coming for you," he said without turning. "Vale, Tristan." The whole brittle apparatus of privilege that cannot stand to be challenged, Maya approached slowly. "You knew this would happen." "Yes," he admitted, "and I wanted to see if you would still stand when the spotlight burned." She bristled. "This isn't a test. This is my sister's life." At that, he turned. His eyes were steel. "Everything is both, Miss Flores, a test and a life. My question is, will you let them write your story, or will you seize the pen?" She met his gaze, anger steadying her spine. "Then give me the pen." A long silence stretched, and then he nodded once. "Good." 2 days later, Maya found herself in a conference room that looked like a courtroom. Long mahogany table, a dozen suited figures around it, microphones gleaming beneath the harsh lights. The Independent Oversight Board had convened at Vale's request to review her appointment. Reporters crowded outside the glass doors, their cameras pressed like weapons against the surface. Inside, the air was cold and clinical. Vale sat opposite her, his smile ablaze. "Miss Flores," he began smoothly, "is it true that you were, until recently, employed as a waitress at a steakhouse downtown?" "Yes," Maya said. Her voice was calm, though her heart thudded. "And that you were suspended for insubordination after verbally accosting my client, Mr. Tristan Sterling?" She held his gaze. "No. I intervened when he harassed a colleague. There's a difference." Vale's smirk widened, like a fisherman feeling the tug on the line. "And now, just days later, you sit here as the director of a multi-million-dollar grant program. Do you see how that might appear to the public? That perhaps this is not about qualifications, but about appeasement?" Maya leaned forward. Her voice was low, but it carried. "The public didn't see what I saw. A girl barely out of high school, cornered by men twice her size. They didn't see her flinch when he touched her. They didn't hear the way his friends laughed. But I did, and I acted. If that offends your client, so be it. I won't apologize for doing my job as a human being." For the first time, Vale's expression faltered. One of the board members, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes, leaned toward her microphone. "And what of your qualifications, Miss Flores? Why should this board believe you capable of directing a program of this magnitude?" Maya's mouth went dry. The old fear surged. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was a waitress. But then she remembered Amelia's fragile hands clutching hers, Chloe's tearful gratitude, Robert's words, "You see people." She drew a breath. "Because I've been where they are. Families drowning in bills, mothers skipping meals so their children can take their medicine. People reduced to statistics on forms that vanish into bureaucratic voids. I know what it means to beg for help and get silence. And I know what it means when someone finally answers. I don't have a degree in public policy. What I have is perspective. What I have is fire. And with the resources of this foundation, I can turn that into change." The room went quiet. The board member who had asked the question sat back slowly, her eyes narrowing in thought. Vale scribbled something on a legal pad, but his smugness was gone. That night, Maya returned to her apartment exhausted, every muscle trembling with spent adrenaline. She dropped her bag on the couch and checked her phone. Another message from Tristan. "Enjoy your big speech, waitress. You'll fall. They always do. And when you do, I'll be waiting." She stared at the screen, her anger rising like a tide. She typed back, hands steady. "You've already lost, Tristan. The difference is you don't know it yet." She hit send, turned the phone face down, and for the first time in weeks, slept without nightmares. Because somewhere deep down, beneath the fear and the fury, she knew she had passed a threshold. The smear campaigns, the threats, even Tristan himself, they were noise. The work was the signal. And she was no longer powerless. The decision arrived at 7:12 a.m., stamped in blue and clipped to an email so terse it felt like a confession. The Independent Oversight Board affirms the appointment of Miss Maya Flores as Director of the Patient Advocacy Grant Program. Petition for injunction denied. No flourish, no apology, just a door unbolted. Maya read it once, then again, then closed her eyes and let her forehead rest against the cool glass of her kitchen window. Outside, the city was a pale bruise of dawn. Sirens murmured far off, a bus sighed at the corner, a stray dog trotted with the grim purpose of something that survives because it must. Her phone buzzed with a stacked column of texts. Davies, cleared, I'll see you at 9. Robert, well done. Dr. Evans, call me, let's schedule Amelia's infusion. And one at the bottom from an unknown number that she somehow recognized anyway. This isn't over. No name, no threat spelled out. It didn't have to be. She didn't answer it. Instead, she pulled on a sweater, tied her hair back, and called her mother. "Mom," she said, when the sleepy voice answered. "They approved it, all of it. We start today." There was a small noise on the other end, something between a laugh and a sob, and then her mother saying her name like it was a prayer. "Maya." "Wake up, Amelia," Maya said, smiling through the sting in her eyes. "Tell her I'll meet you both at the hospital. Bring the big headphones. Today's a long day, but after this, it gets easier." It wasn't a promise. It was an oath. Sterling Tower's lobby felt different now. The marble still shone. The guards still stood with that posture of polite alertness. But the building no longer looked down on her. Maybe it never had. Maybe it had been waiting. Davies was already in the elevator. Bottle green suit, hair cleanly pinned, a stack of folders hugged to her chest. "You slept?" she asked, more observation than care. "I did," Maya said, and in the mirrored doors she caught the reflection of someone she knew but hadn't seen in years. Shoulders square, eyes clear. "Good," Davies said, "because we're moving fast. Legal needs your signature on the board's response before 10. Finance has configured the fund disbursement sequence. They'll brief you. And the social team wants to know if you'll record a short message. Nothing grand. Documentation for grantees. Logistics, tone, reassurance. No hero packages," Maya said. "No soft focus editing." Davies' mouth flicked upward. "I've already told them." "Of course you have." The doors opened onto the floor that had been carved almost overnight into the beating heart of the program. A bullpen of case managers, private rooms for consults, a glass-walled war room with a map of the country pricked by 100 red pins, already beginning to shift toward blue. On the far wall, a sentence in small, unadorned type. "We intervene." In her office, a black folder waited. "Grant, Flores, Amelia." She signed with a hand that didn't shake, and the system, its arithmetic as cold and impartial as any weather, dispatched an avalanche of green lights. Insurance overridden. Pharmacy authorized. Transport arranged. Hotel booked for her mother next door to the hospital wing. A thicket of barriers fell all at once, like a magician's cloth pulled back to show that the cage had never been locked. It had only been designed to look like one. "You'll make the announcement at noon," Davies said, scanning a checklist. "Not about Amelia, specifically. About the first tranche, 143 families. We'll release names only with consent. We have consent for 78. The others will be anonymized." "What about the smear?" Maya asked. "It's still out there. Vale's filing lost, but the narrative is weaker than truth," Davies said. "We have receipts. The bots, the purchased reviews, the shell agencies. We'll publish a transparency report after the announcement. What we fund, what we don't, how decisions are made. Light has a way of making cowards blink, and him," Maya said. She didn't say Tristan's name. Some names were invitations. "We keep building," Davies said. "It's the one thing he doesn't know how to answer." At 11, Maya stood at the foot of her sister's hospital bed and watched a nurse in purple gloves check the drip line. Amelia looked small against the white, 14 going on ancient. The last flare had chewed at her face. The rash was fading now, a ragged map. The headphones sat around her neck like a necklace too big for her. She grinned up at Maya with the stubborn humor that had always felt like defiance. "Doc says I can pick the playlist," Amelia said. "I told him it's morally important that I start with 80s power ballads." Dr. Evans, standing at the monitors, lifted his hands in surrender. "I don't argue with ethics." Maya kissed her sister's forehead. "I have to go for an hour," she said. "Announcement. Then I'll be back. I'll bring smoothies, strawberry." "Obviously." "Hey," Amelia said, tugging lightly on Maya's sleeve. "You did it." Maya glanced at the quiet machinery, their soft heartbeats, the bag of clear medicine that, if science and mercy stayed in agreement, would cool the war in her sister's body. She thought of the 3 silent days after the restaurant, the review bombs, the anonymous threats. She thought of the boardroom with its microphones like little guillotines, and Vale's smile like a razor inside a handshake. "No," she said. "We did." Her mother, standing beside the window with her hands tucked under her arms the way she did when she was trying not to shake, met Maya's eyes and nodded once. An entire vocabulary, compressed. Outside, the day was turning bright. She told herself the light was just light. She didn't have to make it mean anything. But as she walked back towards the elevators, she felt it across her shoulders anyway. Not benediction exactly, just warmth. The earth turning as it always had. A promise that predated every program and every board. The announcement was not a press conference. Maya refused the podium, the rows of press badges, the staged answers. She took a table in the glass pavilion on the roof garden, the city spread to the horizon, and sat with 6 families who had said yes to being seen. A mother from Tulsa with a son who needed a trial that existed only on an island 3,000 miles away. A college student who had been rationing insulin like a soldier behind a ruined wall. An electrician with a rare cancer and a TikTok set by the wrong calendar. They spoke, and cameras recorded them, and the story knitted itself without slogan or script. When they were done, Maya turned to the handful of reporters who had been invited and waited, not for softballs, but for the inevitable. "Your critics say this is about optics," one of them said, "that you're here because of the name Sterling, not because of merit." "I'm here because we're doing the work," Maya said. "Merit will be measured by outcomes. Check back in a year. If we failed, write that. If we haven't, write that too. What about the allegation that you're a symbol, not a leader?" Maya smiled. "Symbols don't sign checks." Laughter broke the tension. It wasn't derisive, just human. She finished with the only line she'd prepared. "We are not in the business of applause. We are in the business of time. Every grant we approve buys someone time. Time to heal, to work, to raise a child, to say goodbye. If there's a ledger somewhere that matters, that's the one." The feed went live across the Foundation's channels. People watched on lunch breaks, in waiting rooms, at bus stops. The comments were not all kind. They were never all kind. But the data began to outrun the noise, and by the time Maya returned to the hospital, the first wave of approvals had hit bank accounts across the country. And 100 phones buzzed in 100 kitchens, and in those invisible rooms, strangers cried the same shapeless sound of relief. She found Robert on the roof at dusk, a silhouette against the soft bleeding edge of sunset. He didn't turn when she approached. He didn't have to. "You were right about light," she said. Some of them blinked. He gave a small breath of what might have been amusement. "Some will always stare through it. You work anyway." She leaned on the rail. The city was a low thrum, steady and enormous. "The board's decision, did you ever doubt it?" "I doubt everything," he said. "It keeps me honest." "And Tristan?" The name landed like a coin in a fountain. Little noise, deep sink. "He sent me a single sentence after the hearing," Robert said. "He said I'd chosen a stranger over blood." He paused a moment, the evening air holding still around him. Blood is an accident. Choice is an act. Maya studied his profile. It was carved from certainty and weather. "He's still your son." "He is," Robert said, "and I will continue to try to be his father. But I will not let him devour the parts of this world that can still be saved." He turned at last. "You taught me that line." "I told a man to leave a restaurant," she said. "You built a runway around the word. You refused a gravity," he said. "Now refuse the rest." Vale will not stop. Tristan will not stop. This is where they live, in the friction. "The answer is movement forward," she said, relentlessly. The first setback came 3 weeks later, the way setbacks do. Stupid and preventable if the world were fair. A pharmacy partner balked at an off-label approval. A case manager slipped in a clause that delayed another family's check by 7 days. 7 days when the landlord had already posted notice. Maya sat with the file, the smallness of the error magnified by the scale of its consequence, and felt anger knock in that old familiar rhythm. "Fix it," she told the room. "We're trying," someone said. "There are protocols." "Then change them," she said. "Now." She called the landlord herself. She didn't announce who she was. She just explained and asked, and when asking wasn't enough, offered the Foundation's guarantee. The man grumbled and postured and asked for proof of funds. She sent it. He relented. She hung up and found Davies leaning in the doorway, arms folded. "That was not standard," Davies said. "Is that criticism?" "It's admiration disguised as a warning," Davies said. "If you make a habit of outrunning the machine, it will expect you to sprint forever." "Then let it train," Maya said. "I won't ask a family to set a clock by our bureaucracy." Davies nodded. "I'll draft the policy changes." "Of course you will." They worked past midnight, and at 2 in the morning, the war room whiteboard was a tangle of arrows and X's, a coach's playbook for a game where no victory held long, but every yard mattered. The confession arrived by accident, or perhaps arrogance. Vale filed an amended complaint in a separate case. Buried in an exhibit was an invoice from a company in Belgrade that specialized in sentiment shaping. The invoice listed Tristan's Shell LLC as the client. The amounts were comically brazen. Davies found it on a Sunday. By Monday morning, the social team had spun up a plain language explainer and published it alongside the transparency report. No gloating, no adjectives, just the receipts. The narrative buckled. Sponsors pulled back from Tristan's club appearances. A podcast host who had championed him posted a tepid apology. Henderson, the manager from the Gilded Spoon, sent a crawling email, a bile-thin pardon of his own. "I see now that," it began. And Maya closed it without finishing. "Some bridges don't burn. They just vanish because you stop walking toward them." That afternoon, an envelope appeared at the foundation's front desk with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of Tristan as a child, maybe 5 years old, asleep across his father's chest. Robert's hand was splayed across the boy's back in that instinctive way fathers have when they forget the world and remember the animal of love. No note, no threat, just the image. Maya took it upstairs. Robert stood with it a long time, then slipped it into his jacket. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. By the time summer leaned into itself, the program had a rhythm that felt like music. You couldn't quite hum, but always knew when it hit a sour note. The case managers learned to triage better than any emergency room nurse. The finance team learned to authorize exceptions with the speed of common sense. The map on the wall was mostly blue now, and new pins grew like constellations. One cluster around a rural county that had been a pharmacy desert for a decade. Another tracing a line along a highway where a mobile clinic now made its slow, furious rounds. On a Wednesday in July, Maya took Amelia to the lake. They sat on the pier with their legs hanging over the water, the wood hot against their thighs. Amelia had color in her cheeks again. The rash had faded to a faint shadow you couldn't see if you didn't know where to look. "Do you ever think about that night?" Amelia asked, squinting at a gull that looked like it had opinions. "The restaurant," Maya said. "Every day?" "Me too," Amelia said. "Not because of him, because of you." She bumped her shoulder into Maya's. "I was scared you were going to be one of those movie heroes who dies in the first act just to teach the main character something." "I'm the main character," Maya said dryly. "All of this is my rom-com." "Gross," Amelia said, and laughed, the sound so ordinary Maya wanted to bottle it. They watched a small sailboat tack clumsily against the wind and then catch it. For a moment, the motion was elegant, inevitable. "Do you think he'll stop?" Amelia asked. "No," Maya said, "but I think we'll get better at ignoring him." On the last Friday of August, Maya returned to the Gilded Spoon. Not for dinner, for a meeting. The restaurant was half renovated now. New chairs, the velvet finally retired. The smell of cigar smoke purged by an expensive system that hummed like a polite ghost. Henderson was gone. A woman in her 40s with sleeve tattoos and a grin that said she'd wrestled her own share of wolves ran the place. "We want to host a monthly night," the new manager said. "Quiet. No cameras. Vouchers for families who need a break. We'll comp the meals. You bring the names. No speeches, just dinner." Maya looked at the back booth. The light fell differently now, softer, as if the room had been given permission to be kind. "Deal," she said. She left a card at the server station. "Call me if any man forgets how to behave," and walked back out into a city that had not changed and had, in 1,000 tiny ways, changed entirely. That evening, as the tower's rooftop turned violet, Robert joined her in the pavilion with 2 paper cups of coffee. He set one in front of her and sat without ceremony. "Do you know why I built this garden?" he asked after a time. "To impress donors," she said. "To remember dirt," he said. "When you spend long enough in rooms that echo, You forget the smell of it. A dangerous amnesia. She cradled the cup, steam blooming against the glass. I learned something from you, she said. I used to think power was a person with a pen and a helicopter. He chuckled, low. It can be, she said. But the thing I keep seeing? Power is a nurse who shows up for the night shift and talks a terrified kid through an infusion. It's a landlord who agrees to wait 7 days. It's a case manager who spends an hour on hold and doesn't hang up. It's small and stubborn, and everywhere Robert nodded. Distributed power. The only kind that lasts. They sat in companionable quiet, watching the lights come on across 1,000 windows. Somewhere below, a bus wheezed to a stop, and people boarded, and the driver nodded a greeting he had probably made 1,000 times. The world did not applaud. It moved. Will you take a vacation? Robert asked, half a smile there. When Amelia's better, Maya said. When the map is all blue. So never, he said. So not soon, she allowed. He lifted his cup. She lifted hers. They clinked like a tiny ritual. To time, he said. To time, she echoed. They drank. And then they went back to work.